Hello everyone, my name is Brandon Creel and welcome to the Jackson George Regional Library System's virtual adult summer reading program. Our theme this year is Imagine Your Story. Today we are proud to be partnering with Robert Alexander. He will be doing our fantasy football program this afternoon. But before we start our program, we have some very exciting news for you. We are giving away $25 gift cards provided by the Friends of the Library groups. Look for our giveaway announcement and rules each week on Facebook. Be sure to watch both programs each week on Facebook Live or check them out on our website by clicking on the adult program link. Now, before I pass things off to Mr. Robert, you will find an attached document to this video. It's going to have different links that will help you about fantasy football, and also kind of like a cheat sheet showing like what QB stands for or what does the touchdown is for, etc. All right, let's go on to Mr. Robert here.
Well, I want to wish everyone a good evening, and I am so glad you have tuned in to the program tonight. I am thrilled to have this opportunity to be with the library tonight and to be spending time with every one of you. I appreciate the invitation. And what better topic to discuss as you think about Imagine Your Story than having our imaginations run wild by having our own football team. But did you know that fantasy sports are growing by leaps and bounds in popularity among all who enjoy watching sports? I know I love to watch sports. I love to watch football, baseball, basketball, you name it. But fantasy football is the most popular of all fantasy sports. Now we might ask, what do we mean by fantasy sports? Well, they are simply games in which the participants serve as general managers of virtual professional sports teams. And each participant selects their rosters by participating in a draft in which all relevant players in that sport are available. And points are based on the actual performances of the players in real-world competition. This definition applies to baseball, hockey, basketball, but for our interest this evening, football. So when we think about fantasy football, the definition we just gave is how we would define what it is we mean by fantasy football. Did you know that fantasy football actually began almost 50 years ago? And I didn't know that until I recently started researching this. But in 1962, it kicked off with a California businessman and a limited partner in the Oakland, now Las Vegas Raiders, Wilfred Wickenbach, during a Raiders road trip to New York. Wickenbach, along with a Raiders PR man, Bill Tunnell, and reporter Scotty Sterling, formed the first fantasy football league. They developed a system of organization and a rule book which would serve as the foundation for modern-day fantasy football. Now, at the time, unlike you and I today, they didn't have computers. So they had to keep score by hand, by pen, pencil, and paper. Just imagine how time-consuming that was. But little did they know that they would kick off something that would become as big as it has become here in 2020. By 1984, Tom Kane Jr. and Cliff Carpentier wrote the 1984 Fantasy Football Digest, detailing the rules of fantasy football. Growth of the game continued with magazines and other publications. By 1988, 32 years ago, and a report by USA Today found that over 500,000 people were playing fantasy football. And obviously, here in 2020, that number is well on into the millions. For as popular as fantasy football is, there are those, and perhaps you're out there tonight, who may want to play it but simply do not know how to. And for a long time, I was one of them. I just didn't know how to get into it. I thought it would be time consuming. I didn't know until one of my friends told me, you can join our league. We're on Yahoo. We're playing Yahoo Fantasy Football. You can join up with us, and it's free. And that put my my concerns at ease. And so when I started playing, when I got involved for the first time with fantasy football, I found really it was not that complicated, especially playing online. And it did not take that much time. Now, I do say that that some take fantasy football to the extreme. It has become a big money-making business for some, but tonight we are dealing with the majority of the leagues as being free. And if you're concerned about having to pay in or buy something, this should take the concern out, because it is a free thing to play over many platforms. And so, as we think about these things, I want to talk to you a little bit about the ins and outs of fantasy football. And as you get into these leagues, as you research a particular league that you want to join, I want to discuss the types of football that can be played. We then will consider the types of leagues you can join, how you play, and then some places where you can play it for free. And my objective tonight is to give you a good jumping off point into fantasy football. And so, as we think about types of fantasy football, there are two primary types when you jump online and you look at all the free leagues that you can join. Number one, there is traditional. In traditionals, the competition which runs for an entire season, culminating in playoffs. Now, in the league I played in Yahoo Fantasy Football, our league was traditional. Its regular season would be the first 14 weeks of the NFL regular season, with the last 3 weeks serving as our playoffs. But not all traditional leagues do it this way. Depending on which platform you're on, it will vary. But many of these have this basic setup. On the other hand, you have Dynasty or Keeper leagues. Now, these are drafted in the same way as a traditional season-long league, but these carry over. They continue indefinitely. For example, in my Yahoo Fantasy League, our league would end after that season. And so the next season, we would have to be invited back, each of us players, and we would go back in and re-register. And they would ask, and Yahoo would ask us, do you want to keep your team name from the previous year? And we would. However, we would have to start all over that season with a new batch of players. However, those who are players in a Dynasty League keep their same players from the prior season. So, if you won your league the previous season, and if you're in a Dynasty League, you can understand how this would be advantageous to you. So you would already be starting out with perhaps an advantage, having kept the same team you won with the year before. Whereas with the traditional, everyone's starting out on an even foot. However, those who are new to the league, they will have a draft for their players. Keeper leagues are similar to Dynasty, with the main difference being that in a keeper league, each one will have a designated number of players they can keep on their roster, whereas the rest of them will go back into the pool. And so those are the two primary types that you will find when playing fantasy football. But what are some of the league types? Well, there are many different methods for organizing a league. Some can be combined, but here's an overview of some of the types of leagues you may play in. Number one, there is head-to-head. And this is where one fantasy team matches up against another. And this is the type of league I've played in with Yahoo. And the team which receives the most points gets the win for the week over the other team. And points are dictated by the scoring system. And here's the best part about playing online. It is set up by the website. So you can allow the computer to do the work for you. Or it can be custom set by the manager of the league. But this takes a lot of the work out of the game. A team's total is the sum total of all players' points who are placed in a starting slot by the team owner for the day they are playing. Now, if you're worried about this taking all of your time, you do not have to watch all of the actual games, because online the computer keeps up with the stats for you. And that's one good thing. You can set your roster for the week and be done with it. But teams with the best win-loss records advance to the playoffs. There are also total points leagues where teams accumulate points on an ongoing basis, and standings are determined by a team's total points, not just over a week, but over the course of a season. And win-loss records do not matter. Then there is the all-play leagues, in which all teams play each other every week. So if there are 14 teams in the league, the top scoring team would be 13-0. The second highest scoring team would be 12-1. Now, if you are the lowest scoring team, I guess you can understand where you would be. 0-13, unfortunately. But that's how those types of leagues works. Now, there are also leagues where you can start 2 quarterbacks in your weekly lineup, which can bring you even greater points, as well as individual defensive player leagues. Now, in most leagues, you will draft individual offensive players, but you will also have draft only a specific NFL defense as a whole. But there are some leagues in which you can draft both individual offensive players as well as individual defensive players, where you don't have the whole defense, but rather individuals from various defenses to play on your defense. So these are all the various types of leagues. And some if you get into it and you dig hard, some will combine some of these into one. Like traditional may have be also a 2 quarterback league, or also an individual defensive player league. Total points may be the same as well as all play 2 quarterback league, or all play just an individual defensive player league. Some of these mix and match. But that's a basic overview of what you are going to find here in fantasy football. But how do you play it now? That's a question you may be asking. Well, it's not as complicated as you think, and when I first got into it, before I started playing, I thought it was convoluted, and I just didn't have the time. But it really is simple. First of all, you have a draft, in which the league holds a draft to determine which players goes to which team. And when you play online, here's the beauty of this. The computer runs the draft for you, which makes it easy and far less time consuming, because if you run your own draft, you have to get everyone together at a specific time, which isn't always easy to do, because we all live busy lives and we all don't have the same schedules. And so you can set the time for when the computer will draft for you, and it'll run your draft for you, taking a lot less time and you not having to be on the computer for hours. And the computer does it by using player rankings to automate the draft cycle. Now, the players that are drafted to your team you keep unless you trade them or drop them, in which those players then enter a pool that any team may claim. And you can claim players that have been dropped as well if you need to. So when you think about the team roster then, you have a predetermined number of players as well as a specified number at each position that can or must be used in each game. And each player determines each week which player will start and which will remain on the bench. And just like in real football, those on the bench can become starters due to a starter getting injured, playing poorly, or if a starter has no game that week. And this is where I must caution you when playing, because if your player is out injured and cannot play, and you leave them in that starting spot, you're not going to get any points for that. Or if the player is on a bye week, you need to substitute that player out as well, because they don't have a game that week, and if you leave that player in the starting slot without a game, you will not get points. So that's a friendly reminder, because I was burned by that a couple of times when in playing. There would be times I would be busy and forget to set my roster, and as a result I'd have a player or two who would not play that week due to injury or because their team was off that week, and as a result I wound up with 0 points in a couple of slots, and those 0 points can cost you a game in the head-to-head matchup. So that's something to keep in mind. And also to keep in mind, every week the starters in fantasy must be selected prior to the beginning of the real world game. If you wait till kickoff, it's too late. But you have up until a few hours before kickoff to set your roster, to set your starters. And it only takes maybe 5 minutes at the most to go in and set your roster, so it isn't time consuming. When you think about your starters, in most leagues you will have 1 QB or quarterback, 2 running backs or RBs, 2 wide receivers. In some, you'll have a flex position, and that is a position where you can place a running back, a wide receiver, or a tight end, and then you have your tight end position. You'll have a place kicker, a team defense, and then 6 on the bench. Now, not every league does this, but this is a general format you will find when playing, and that's what I'm wanting to give you tonight, just a general format. Now, what about the scoring, you may ask? Well, your team earns points based on your starters' performances in weekly games. For example, a touchdown may be worth 6 points, where each yard rushed, passed, or received may be worth a certain number of points. Kickers accumulate points through field goals and extra points. The team defense accumulates points through defensive plays, such as causing turnovers, sacking the quarterback, safeties, block kicks, or even scoring their own touchdowns. And also by limiting the offensive points of the opposing teams. Now, if you have a defense, a team defense that isn't very good, or it has a bad day, such as they give up 6 touchdowns, you're not going to score very many points. But it happens, because you cannot determine what's going to happen in a real-world football game. And that's what makes fantasy football so fun, because it does depend on what happens in real life. So you're not just rooting for your favorite team, you're rooting for the players you have, and you're actually rooting for their teams as well to do the best possible job they can do. Points then are rewarded for positive plays, but points are taken away for negative plays. And this is one reason I encourage you, if you decide to play, to do it online. Because it removes a lot of the pencil work in playing. You don't have to do all that adding and subtracting of numbers. Let the computer do it for you if you can. And every league differs in how it scores. But let me share with you the typical standard scoring, how it does in Yahoo. You would get 1 point for every 25 passing yards, 1 point for every 10 rushing yards, 1 for every 10 receiving yards, 6 points for a touchdown. And this is where you want your players to do the best. If they're having a really good game rushing or passing or receiving, you want it to pay off with touchdowns. 4 or 6 points for a passing touchdown. You can see why you would want a really good quarterback here. However, if you throw interceptions or lose a fumble, you get negative 2 points. So it takes 2 points away from your score. 1 point for each extra point made. Now on field goals, 3 points for field goals that are between up to 39 yards. You would get 4 for field goals from 40 yards to 49 yards, and 5 points for field goals of 50 yards or longer. For the defense, you would get 2 points for each turnover your defense forces, 1 point per sack in which your defense sacks the quarterbacks, 2 points when they force a safety, 6 points for each touchdown the defense scores, 2 points for blocked kicks. Now, when you think about leagues with individual defensive players, scores with those individual players are counted rather than as a defense, with points given for tackles, how many tackles each player made, how many sacks they made, how many interceptions they had. If they forced a safety, they would be counted as points, or if they scored a touchdown themselves. And so in individual defensive player leagues, that can be less penalizing in a way than what you have when you play with a whole defense. So that's another thing to keep in mind when playing. Now, what about going about finding a league? We talk about it being free, and it is. Let me give you some keys. Free leagues. I mentioned Yahoo. Yahoo is a great fantasy sports platform, and it's easy to use, and that's my recommendation. But you can also go to ESPN.com and be careful on there. They have free leagues as well as leagues in which you have to pay, so you must pay very close attention. CBSSports.com, NFL.com. Another good way to find free leagues is by typing in your search engine, free fantasy football leagues, such as, go to Google and type in free fantasy football leagues, and it'll pop up a list for you. However, we also want to emphasize this. Be sure to read the rules. Every league is different. Every league has different rules. So before signing up, I encourage you to read those rules. Read them very carefully so you will not be surprised. I hope tonight in our discussion of fantasy football, I hope that this has been helpful to you and to all who are interested in playing fantasy football. And if you decide to play, please take this information and use it so that you will have a great experience playing fantasy football. And I found when I got into it, I really enjoyed it. And it doesn't take that much time. 10 to 15 minutes a week. Check your rosters to set them. Make transactions such as a trade, but also to check the score after the game, see if you won or lost. So it's easy to play. And so I hope you'll take this. And if you decide to play fantasy football, I hope you'll find these tips very helpful. Thank you for your interest in this subject, and have fun playing fantasy football.
Thank you, Mr. Alexander, for coming by today. It's been a pleasure. Before we let you go, we have some more things to talk about. We have more programs coming, including best-selling author Carolyn Haynes on June 17th at 6 p.m. And remember, be sure to enter our adult library gift card giveaway. Curbside pickup and library by mail services will continue all throughout the summer. Visit our website at www.jgrls.org for all the information. Thank you for watching the Jackson George Regional Library System's virtual summer reading program, inspiring ideas, enriching lives, and building communities.